Hello hunters, and welcome back to Super Fan Natural. A large part of Supernatural's lore is based off Abrahamic mythology, especially Christianity, with the angels and the demons and the heaven, and most importantly, a single all-powerful God creating pretty much everything. Now, if you haven't watched it, then don't misunderstand, this isn't really a religious show. There may be a lot of biblical elements, but most of them get subverted in one way or another. For example, angels aren't really good guys, Satan is more of a petty narcissist than a lord of all evil. In fact, on multiple occasions, it's stated that a large chunk of the Bible is made up in the show. One of the biggest changes the show made was the fact that at some point in the vague past, God decided that he no longer cared about ruling over heaven and earth, so he left and went into hiding until the early 2000s when he took the form of a washed-up writer, started going by Chuck Shirley, and started writing about and manipulating the lives of Sam and Dean Winchester. This decision has huge ramifications for all of creation, yet we never really get an answer as to why he took off. Now, we did eventually get a reason from Chuck himself. However, all he said was that,
"'Cause you disappointed me. You all disappointed me."
That's something, but what exactly did they all do that was so disappointing? I mean, when it comes to humanity, there's plenty of possibilities, yet he very noticeably avoided giving any specifics. It's also worth pointing out that he was talking to Metatron when he said that, which to me seems as if he was including angels in the disappointment. I mean, Metz was a human at the time, but that was a recent development. So, what could man and angel have done to anger the Lord so badly he just left? We may never know for sure, but I believe I've come up with a sound theory based off of hints and clues we get from the show. The most common theory as to why Big G dipped revolves around mankind's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Basically, God favored humans over all other creations, so he gave them a paradise dimension that was guarded against evil by his most trusted angel, Gadriel. Eventually, the jealous archangel Lucifer managed to trick Gads into letting him in, and he would go on to mess with humanity in a variety of ways, including turning some of them into the first demons, as well as tempting Cain to kill his brother Abel. Eventually, man was considered so corrupt that God booted them from the garden and made it impossible for them to ever re-enter. The common theory goes that after this event, God decided to head out, which would make sense. However, there is some evidence that he stuck around for at least a little while longer, and the best of these little hints come from the words of God. Not his literal spoken words. No, what I'm talking about are a compendium of stone tablets called the Words of God, which contain instructions from the big man himself on how to deal with supernatural phenomena. There were 3 that we knew of, one about demons, one about angels, and one about the Leviathans, these ancient creatures God made before angels and man. What makes the words so important to this video is the fact that, according to Metatron, dictating these puppies was the very last thing that God did before leaving the building. The words themselves don't seem to give any direct info about his motives or timing, but if you pay attention to their contents, you get hints about things that had already happened by the time God decided to write them. First, in the Leviathan tablet, God gave instructions on how to make a weapon that could kill the Chompers. One of the ingredients involved is the blood of an alpha, aka the progenitor of a specific species of monster. What makes this interesting is that we have some idea of when the alphas came to be. See, the alphas were created by a creature named Eve, who, in and of herself, is a whole bucket of mysteries. We know that she was born in a dimension called Purgatory, and that roughly 10,000 years ago, she managed to come up to Earth somehow and seed the planet with her monster children. And apparently, God was around for all of that. I mean, it is possible that he saw that this was going to happen in the future, but doing that not only destroys this theory, it also makes it really hard to establish any kind of timeline. For the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that the tablets were written without the use of future sight, even though God can definitely see the future that's established in the show. Another hint about the tablet's timeline comes from the Demon Tablet, which contains a spell to open rifts into alternate universes. This is really strange because multiversal travel seems like it's supposed to be super duper off limits, but apparently God decided that man should have instructions on how to do it. It's worth noting that in order for the spell to work, you need something that has already been to the universe you're trying to access, meaning that it's effectively useless unless something has already crossed over. Anyway, one of the required ingredients is a weird space rock known as the Seal of Solomon, because good old King Saul is the first and only person known to have it. This gets really strange when you realize that God also refers to the rock that way. It's called the Seal of Solomon in the Demon Tablet. So again, assuming God wasn't using future vision to dictate the tablets, it would mean that he was still around and doing stuff during Solomon's time on Earth. This is actually supported further by the fact that we know of another incident in which both God and Solomon were involved. Nephilim. Nephilim are the hybrid children of humans and angels. And their very existence is considered super duper double triple extra forbidden, and for good reason. These little monsters have a crazy amount of potential. In fact, the strongest version, those fathered by archangels, are literally world-breakingly powerful to the point they can accidentally tear open multiversal rifts. That's a bit of an extreme case, but Cass does say that even the spawn of a regular angel has the potential to kill entire worlds. His confidence in the matter seems to be related to the fact that at some point in Earth's vague past, there were Nephilim running around who caused such massive problems that Big G himself had to step in to get rid of them. We don't know exactly what all went down, but we do know that during his lifetime, our boy King Solomon shared the earth with at least one Nephilim, known only as the Queen of Sheba. This is a good time to point out that when it comes to time in history, supernatural is all sorts of wonky. The show mixes real history with biblical history, what points out several times that the events recorded in religious texts aren't particularly accurate. For example, original man Adam claims to have been 300,000 years old. I bring all this up because Solomon is one of those legendary figures who has an official timeline in our world, so I just wanted to establish that the show's version doesn't necessarily have to line up with real lore. Anyway, Solomon apparently used a tracking spell to hunt down the angelic queen, though we aren't told why. It is very possible that the queen was conceived sometime after the rest of her kind got purged, but that wouldn't really change the fact that Solomon was named in one of the tablets, heavily implying that God was still upstairs during his lifetime. So if we combine all the details gleaned from the tablets, then we can get a picture of the world that God walked away from. And honestly, it's kind of messy. It's a planet plagued by monsters and hybrids that require divine intervention, and space rocks that can be used to open rifts into even worse places. Honestly, you could argue that any one of those headaches was enough to push Chuck over the edge. However, I think it's possible, and more interesting, to combine all of these things into one series of events that made the Godfather lose faith in his creation. Let me set the scene for you. Up to this point, God has been let down by two of his most precious creations. Not only did humanity throw away their chance at paradise, some of them turned out to be so wicked they could even be converted into evil spirits. Angels weren't much better. It was the big guy's favorite angel who brought out the worst in mankind. And that was only possible because God's most trusted angel, Gadriel, failed to keep his big bro at a planet paradise. All of that definitely contributed to his downward spiral, but I don't think any of them were the last straw. No, I think that came after these two failed species intermixed to create abominations so dangerous they required a godly Thanosing. We never find out what exactly the Nephilim did to warrant literal divine intervention. It could be that they were just too strong, but I don't necessarily think so. A regular Nephile was taken out by an angel blade, and even if that's a bad example, it's not like God has a problem letting really powerful creatures run amok. After all, he didn't step in to get rid of Hell's princes or knights. So I personally think that the true danger of the hybrids lie in their ability to open doors that God intended to stay shut. We know that Nephilim are capable of opening rifts into other worlds, as Jack was able to open ones into other universes. Now admittedly, that's a bit of an outlier since Jack was the most powerful breed of Nephilim possible, and even then, he needed help from a Dreamwalker to pull it off, so it's pretty unlikely that a regular Nephilim could crack open the universal divide. But what about another dimension, like heaven or hell? That seems more doable, right? I mean, a human witch created a spell for traveling to and from the depths of hell itself for fun, so I don't think it's a stretch to say that a Nephilim could also open a rift into the afterlife. My theory is that the thing that finally rustled God's jimmies enough for him to just walk away was a human and a Nephilim teaming up and punching a hole into Purgatory, thus unintentionally releasing monsters onto the world. Stick with me here. The whole reason that Purgatory exists is to contain the primordial monsters, Eve and the Leviathans, so that they don't devour the entire planet. Because of this, it seems like God made it at least a little bit trickier for people to get in and out compared to other afterlives. There are a handful of ways to gain access. However, considering the fact that it took the combined efforts of Cass and the King of Hell Crowley an entire year to find just one, really shows how secretive doorways into Monsterland really are. Despite that, we know that Eve somehow managed to escape the Forbidden Forest and make her way to Earth about 10,000 years ago. We just don't know how she did it. I theorized that she walked through a rift opened by a human Halo hybrid, and actually, I'll go as far as to name the perpetrators. I think we can blame Big G's departure on King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. It may sound ridiculous, but really, consider what we know. There was a guy who owned a magic rock that was a key component to opening rifts, and during his lifetime, he just so happened to track down a member of a species that has at least some ability to open dimensional doors. that species would eventually do something so bad it led to them being wiped out by God himself. We also have the Mother of Monsters somehow escaping from a prison dimension that God personally created specifically to keep ancient monsters away from the Earth, and no one seems to know how that happened. Then, sometime after all that, the Lord was so disappointed he basically quit. Is it possible that all of these things are unrelated? Yes, in fact, that's probably the case. But what if it's not? What if the reason why the king wanted to track down a Nephilim was because he somehow found out about these mysterious other realms, places even the angels didn't have access to, and he became obsessed with finding a way to visit them? In real-world legend about Solomon, God comes to the guy in a dream and gives him wisdom, wealth, and in some versions, he throws in supernatural knowledge and power. What if something similar happened in the show's version of events? We know that after the expulsion from Eden, faith and belief in Chuck plummeted, and people started inventing their own gods and religions. Maybe Saul was one of the few who kept the faith, and as a reward, the Lord graced the king with some juicy insider secrets about heaven, hell, angels, demons, and maybe even the earth. I also think it's possible that God personally gave Solomon the celestial stone, not necessarily for any practical use, but more as a physical symbol of his chosen one-esque status. Whatever the case, I think that God specifically gave few, if any, details about Purgatory because it's something that humanity wasn't really meant to mess with or worry about. Thing is, humans aren't really known for their ability to not care about secrets. So, despite all of his divine perks, Solomon just couldn't stop thinking about this forbidden realm. I like to think that he spent years formulating a spell to create an interdimensional window so he could just sneak a little peek, but he could never get it to work. That is, until he caught wind of an incredibly powerful hybrid. I believe that he tracked down the queen, convinced her to help him, then, with her power and maybe the seal, he actually managed to open this window. But the thing about the window is, well, things can still walk through them, and in my story, Eve saw the opening and took the opportunity to investigate, ultimately ending up on Earth. From there, she proceeded to fill the world with monsters, and yeah, I think that was the last straw. God looked down at the world he created, and all he saw was failure and disobedience. Mankind was given a chance at paradise, and they couldn't help but mess it up. The angels were supposed to follow his orders perfectly, yet some of his most trusted couldn't or wouldn't do as they were told. He locked up the monsters to protect both species, yet they somehow managed to mess that up together by creating unnatural hybrids and poking around the one door that was supposed to be locked entirely for their safety. I'm also of the opinion that Eve was created specifically to keep the Leviathans in check, so in this scenario, she also wouldn't be doing her literal God-given job. So he's surrounded by disappointments, and I think that at a certain point, he also has to start questioning his own role in the world. I mean, if he's not liking the trajectory of free will, and he isn't willing to just fix everything, and he also doesn't want to just nuke it all, then what exactly is he sticking around for? Ultimately, he decides that lording over the universe is too much of a headache, and the best thing to do is to just let his creations do whatever they want. Whatever happened would no longer be his responsibility, and with the weight of the world off of his shoulders, he'd be free to do things like experience the world he created, or maybe make new ones. The thing is, he would have to be careful with how he handled his retirement. He couldn't just hang around heaven, because if he did, the angels would never leave him alone. They would always be trying to get his input and instructions because, well, they were quite literally created to do so. No, if he wanted to wash his hands of the situation, he would need to vanish without a trace and never return. Obviously, that would create a whole host of other problems, which I'll talk more about in another video, but spoiler alert, I think that God thought up the apocalypse as a way to keep his kids busy, and this is what started his transition from a creator to a writer. Like I said, more about that in the future at some point. So, Chuck decides to head out, but before he does, there's a few things he needs to take care of. Firstly, the Nephilim gotta go. His children do have to live with their mistakes, but the Nephilim present a unique threat because I genuinely don't think God himself knew exactly how powerful they could be. So, best to just take them off the board. I think it's possible that their destruction coincided with the biblical flood, which God sent to give mankind one last chance at a fresh start. In addition to a global reset, God figured that it wouldn't really be fair to leave humanity at the mercy of angels and demons and leviathans. So, to clear his conscience, he decided to leave behind some emergency instructions that could only be read by specific chosen humans. Now, God could have written the tablets himself, but in doing so, he would run the risk of imbuing them with too much of his power, making them not only words of God, but also hands of God. So he grabs a random angel, Metatron, and has him do the actual writing. While this was going on, he set up the prophet system, which probably deserves its own video to fully explain. Side note, my personal headcanon is that the tablets in the Ark of the Covenant were actually the words, and that God rigged the Ark itself so that it could only be opened by the first prophet, Moses. I know the timeline doesn't really match religious canon, but like I said, that's pretty common for Supernatural. Anyway, once the tablets were complete, God felt that his work was done, so he told Metatron to hand over the words to Michael. Then he was just gone. He would keep an eye on things, and every once in a while he'd secretly reach out to people like Joshua, but for the most part, God had given up on this universe. And now, you know why. Well, you know why I think he did. Whether or not you choose to believe it is up to you. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my theory, or do you have a better idea? Let me know in the comments. Also, stick around after this outro for a fun little outtake. I'll have more content for you soon, but for now, carry on. The most common theory as to why Big G dipped revolved around mankind's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Basically, God favored humans over all of the creations, so he gave them... Oh my god. God, how did you get in here? Holy shit. Oh my god, so my wife and I are cat sitting for a friend, and one of them, I guess, snuck into the room before I closed the door, and I just see this thing dart across the room while I'm recording, and it about gave me a fucking heart attack. Jesus Christ.